Hi, my name's Mel and I'm an educator in IT, and I want to show you how you can actually build websites in AWS. Now, AWS actually has a service which is perfect for people who want to host their websites without getting into the complexities of running all their own servers and their own network. However, if you want to actually run production websites properly, switching to AWS is actually a big jump. So in this series, I want to show you some of the things that you need to do if you want to transfer your websites into AWS LightSail. All right, let's get started. I'm now going to show you the structure that we're going to use for setting up AWS LightSail for our website. When you have managed web hosting, generally you would have a virtual private server, which is all entirely managed for you. And then you might have a separate database. Usually MySQL is the most popular. Now in AWS, it's going to be a little bit different because we're going to set this up manually. The first thing I'm going to do is actually show you what it's going to look like to just create an AWS server in LightSail. So I'm going to go to LightSail. Now I've actually got it in my recently visited here, but if you're the first time here in AWS, you just go to the search bar, type in LightSail, and it's going to come up with that service for you. So we're going to open up this service, and right now I've got nothing in it. So there's no instances. We've got containers, databases, some networking info, storage, domains, and we're going to go over the parts that we need for this. We won't be using containers in this tutorial. Let's just say you were going to do a dummy website in WordPress. You would create an instance. Now, I'm not going to do this yet. I'm just going to show you something here. And when you come here, you can select a blueprint that already has WordPress on it. We don't want to do this, okay? And I'm going to explain why. It's because you're going to have the database and all your files all on this one server. If anything goes wrong, you're going to lose the whole lot. Okay, so I'm going to show you how you can actually do this with a managed database and storing your files on a separate disk for a little bit extra security. And it makes it more transferable later if you need to actually make any changes to your server and upgrade your server without touching your files. If you're doing something for testing, by all means, use this here to quickly spin up a WordPress website and then delete it afterwards. I'm going to show you what our structure is going to look like. We've got a LightSail instance. We're going to have our LightSail disk. So this is where we're going to store our files for our website. And then we're going to have a separate managed database. The very first step in our entire process is to create our instance in AWS LightSail. Coming back to our main LightSail page here, I'm going to create an instance. We were just here before, but now I'm going to choose operating system only. And I'm going to use the Amazon Linux 2023 image. You can use any of the other images, but some of the commands throughout this tutorial might look a little bit different if you're using different Linux servers. We come down here, you may want to enable automatic snapshots. And for now, we're still going to be using IPv4. For your website, it's important to still use IPv4 at the time of this recording. This will eventually change in the future as we move to IPv6, but at the moment, it's really important to still support IPv4. Now, you can see here for my demo, I've got the first 90 days free. I'm going to just select this one here. Depends what your website's going to be used for, but you can actually move between these plans, so it doesn't matter too much at this point. Okay, I'm going to identify my instance. So I'm just going to call this LightSail 01. That's the name I'm going to give it. If you've got a lot of servers, you may want to use tags so that you can identify the services that you're creating. I'm just going to leave that now. Okay, and there is my LightSail instance. Okay, so that server is now ready, and I'm just going to go in and we're going to have a look at some of the features. If I click on connect here, this is just going to bring it up in a browser. I'm actually going to show you how you can connect using Putty. There's a little bit of configuration that you need to do, but you can actually jump here and you can have a little bit of a look. I'm just going to list some files. There's no files there. I'm going to change directory to the root and list the files there. And there you see I've got my command prompts up. So let's have a look at some of the other settings that we've got available to us. I've got my username. I'm going to use that later when I connect to my server via Putty. And you can see here I've got an IP address. This is not a static IP address at this point in time. Okay, so that's my IPv4 address. You can see I've also been allocated an IPv6 address. These are public addresses. And we will later configure a static IP address so that this won't change. We can create a snapshot, so we might do a manual backup. I've got automated snapshots available at the moment. Now you'll see here it's got storage. I will later be configuring a separate storage disk and attaching it to this server, because that's where I'm going to store my files. It means that I can actually replace the whole server. Let's just say it gets corrupted or the operating system's old. I want to do a new upgrade. I can do all that, and it's going to be separate from my files. My files will be preserved. Networking, so you'll see here we can attach a static IP. I might actually do that now. I'm not going to change the name. I'm just going to create and attach that. All right, and that static IP has been created. If your DNS is hosted elsewhere that's not in AWS, you'll need to manually add this IP address as an A record to your DNS. Now, we will need to modify the firewall rules slightly because we want to be able to support HTTPS, and at the moment that's not supported by default. So I'm just going to add a rule for TCP for port 443, which is HTTPS. So that's going to allow you to have a secure website, and we will also be configuring a security certificate. That's going to come later. So I'm going to create that one for now. So here's where you're going to configure the domain. Now, if you've got a domain registered in Route 53, which is in AWS, then you can connect it through LightSail directly. But I've currently got no domains registered in LightSail, so I'm going to manually create an A record where the domain's hosted and then point it to the IP address that we just saw earlier. Now I'm going to actually show you how you can configure Putty to connect to your LightSail instance. So just search for Putty in your browser, and you'll see here the putty.org. See here, just click on download Putty. If you are using a Windows machine, you can download the MSI here and install that. Now, the other file that we're looking for, if you look down here, puttygen.exe, we're going to need that for converting our key that we download from AWS. So once you've done that and downloaded those two files, we'll come back across to our LightSail instance. And you'll see here, when you scroll down, you'll see here there's instructions for connecting using an SSH client. You can jump across and follow those instructions if you like, but I'm also going to show you through it here. And here we click this download default key. So I'm going to click that. Okay, so now that key has downloaded here, but I can't use that in Putty just yet. I've just copied across Putty and Puttygen, and I'm now going to convert that key to a format that Putty can use. So I'm just going to open this tool up. So that's it here. Okay, so I'm going to import this key into the Putty key generator. And then I want to save my private key. Okay, and that's it. So I've now converted that key. Next, I open up Putty. So next I've opened up Putty, and now here I need to configure the settings to connect to this server. So I'm just going to copy that IP address here. I'll pop it into there. I'm going to save this session so I don't need to keep popping this in each time. I'm going to go to SSH, authorization, and then credentials. Open browse and select that key that I just created and open. All right, so now this is configured. I'm opening up and it's just asking me, I haven't cached that key before, so I'm actually going to accept that. And here we now need to type the login details. We don't need a password, but you'll see here it says username is EC2. So we're going to type EC2 user. And I've authenticated. It's now time to actually install Apache and PHP. All right, great. So now I'm logged into my server, and now I'm going to start by installing Apache. Now all of our commands here, I'm going to be using sudo in front of the commands because most of them need admin privileges to run the command. I'm using DNF that's our package installer. Install httpd mod _ssl. Okay, and so this is going to install Apache. Is this okay? So yes, I'm going to install that. Now I like to start that service. So systemctl start httpd, and I'm now going to enable httpd. Excellent. So that's Apache installed. Now I'm just going to verify that installation. Sudo systemctl status httpd, and it's running and it's listening on that server. So that's all we need to do to get Apache running. But now we've got a few other things to install. And so next I'm going to install PHP. Sudo, again, we're going to use DNF. Search PHP, and I'm going to type 8.1. Sudo DNF install PHP 8.1. Now, if you're watching this video at a later date, you want to actually have a look for what's the more recent version of PHP that you want to install. And now let's verify that installation. Okay, good. So PHP is installed. Okay, so now that we've installed Apache and PHP, we'll actually be able to test our basic little website running in our little web server. So I haven't configured the domain or anything yet. So I'm just going to copy this IP address and pop it into the browser. And you'll see here, it comes up with, it works. That's the basic default template that we get from Apache to show that that has installed and it's running. Now we need to configure that extra disk that I was telling you about, because we're going to reconfigure Apache to point to a different default location. We want the web files to be on that separate disk. So we're now going to install a separate disk and connect it to our instance. So I'm going to go to storage, and we're going to use a disk. So there's big differences between a disk and a bucket. So an Amazon bucket is actually a service which it interacts differently with your server. So there is an app, a plugin that you can install into WordPress that will back up to the bucket, but the files will still be in the wrong place. So even if you used an Amazon bucket, you still want to have a separate disk anyway. So I'm going to create that disk, and I'm just going to use the smallest disk. You can give it a meaningful name for you if you like. I'm just going to leave it as disk 1 for now, and I'm going to create that disk. Okay, and then I want to attach it to an instance. So I'm going to attach it to that LightSail instance, and you'll see here that it's given the disk path that we will need for accessing it within the server. So I'm just going to copy and paste that disk path because I'll need to reference that afterwards. And I'm going to attach the disk. So you'll see here it's giving me a warning, and it says because I currently have automatic snapshots enabled, the amount that I'm billed for the automatic snapshot storage will be affected by adding this disk. Okay, so I'm going to accept that for now. And in fact, for testing, I'm actually going to jump back and I'm actually going to turn off the automatic snapshots because I don't actually need it for this server because this is a testing server. It's going to matter for an actual live website. So you can make that decision on whether you want that, but I'm going to turn that off. And yes, I'll disable that. So while that applies, we're going to come in and have a look here, and I'm actually going to run lsblk, and we'll see if we can actually see that on here. So I can actually already see it. The 8 gig disk is there. So the main disk, you'll see here, I've got 20 gig disk there, and this is my 8 gigabyte disk that I just added. So I'm actually going to format the file system on this disk, and I need to type that disk name that I wrote down before. So that was XVDF. Oh, I need sudo. XFS XVDF. Let's try that. Okay, so there we go. I'm just going to verify this now just to check, and that looks okay. So now we need to create a mount point for that disk. I'm going to call it data. So I'm going to go make sudo make dir data. So that's how I'm going to access that drive, that disk, and sudo mount. Now I need to type the disk name. So that's XVDF, and I'm going to point that to data. Excellent. All right, let's just check that out. So find mount. There's that mount point here, data, and it's pointing to the disk that I created. The problem is when we reboot, this is actually going to disappear. So instead of recreating each time, now I want to create a persistent mount upon reboot. First, we're going to make a backup of the fstab file. So sudo, we're going to copy it. We'll copy it to etc fstab.original. So we've got a backup now. And now we're actually going to edit that. I'm going to use nano to edit the fstab file. So I just need to copy and paste. So here we've got the directory, the mount point that it's pointing to, the file system. So let's save that. So we're actually going to restart that server now. Okay, so I've now logged back into the server. So let's have a little check and see if we still have that mount point. And there we go. So I was able to change directory to that directory that I created. And we can also check that disk now as well by typing in the find mnt command, and we can still see that data directory has been mounted to point to that disk. So we are now up to configuring Apache. So now that we've got a separate disk with the mount point, I'm actually going to start configuring my folders where I want Apache to look to. So at the moment, it's looking to its own directories on the instance that I've created. I want it to now point to another directory. I'm in the datas folder. I'm actually just going to make a new directory, www. I'm going to actually change to that directory. I'm going to create another one, and I'm going to name it after my domain. So darkpixel.tech. Oh, and you always have to do sudo. Now, in order for this directory to work with Apache, I'm going to have to change some configuration files. So firstly, I'm going to change the owner. Okay, so for everything inside that www directory, I've changed to be the owner of Apache. So, and we can actually have a look at this, and you'll see there, so Apache is now the owner. But I'm going to jump across now and actually reconfigure Apache to look to this directory. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change to that directory, and I'm just going to create a temporary index.html file just so that I can see for my testing when I've pointed it to the right directory. Let's actually create a file. So I'm going to call that index.html. I'm going to call it test, and we'll call it darkpixel.tech. And we'll exit out of there. So if I jump back across to the web server, it comes to a page that says it works. That's the default in Apache. When I've changed the directory, it should say instead test darkpixel.test. Okay, so to change the website configuration, we've got to edit a file. And I'm going to go to sudo nano etc httpd /conf.d, and we're changing a file called vhost.conf. Now this file's empty at the moment. I'm actually going to use a text file with the Apache configuration that I've already set up. So when you do configure your Apache server, it has to use a specific format. And you'll see here some of these are required. So the server name is required. You need a document root. So I'm going to actually edit this to be in the directory that I've created. You can either copy this whole file, but I'm just going to show you the parts that are actually compulsory that we need to get this working. So we've got a virtual host, and here I need the server name. So when the web request comes in for that domain, now I don't actually have the domain set up yet, so I won't be able to demonstrate that just yet. And now here is where we are going to configure the new location. Okay, so I'm going to go data, and it was www.darkpixel.tech was the name of the folder. And so that's the document root. Now that's optional, and the last one is required. So we do need to put in this last part here. And I'll copy and paste that. Okay, so that's the minimum required to get our web server working. And let's restart the service. Now we'll click refresh and look at that. So now it's redirecting to that directory. So I've now actually added a DNS entry so that darkpixel.tech is pointing to my IP address. Okay, so we've created a new instance. We've installed Apache. We've created and installed a disk, a separate disk to store all our web files on. We've configured Apache to point to that disk. And so this is where we're at in the process now. So we've still got a few things to do. Next in the step is to install a managed database. So now we want to install a managed database. Why do we want to do this? Because the default image that you get when you create a LightSail instance will actually give you a database installed on your instance. And it will be a MySQL database. This isn't as secure because if anything's going to happen to your server and you have to spin up a new server, you've lost your whole database. So you would have to manage your backups yourself, and there's a greater risk with running your database that way. However, if we use the tool in LightSail and we go to databases, this will give you a managed database for you. You don't have to worry about anything. So I'm going to create a database now. This is the safest way to do this. It does cost more though to have a managed database, but it's highly recommended for any production website. So we're going to pick a database, and here I'm happy to pick the latest MySQL database. And I'm going to specify, I'm going to leave it as DB master, because I'm actually going to log into that database separately, and I'm going to create my own databases on that database server. So it's going to get a little bit confusing here because we're going to talk about creating a database in LightSail, and then we're also going to be talking about creating a database on that database server. Okay, it's the same name for two different things, so watch out for that. I don't need high availability. That's only if you've got critical services where you need to have 99.9% uptime. For our purposes, we don't need that. I've got more than enough I need for this testing. And I'm going to just give my database a name. Now, I'm always going to put an O1 on it because you always want to plan for growth. At this point in time, I'm not going to have extra servers, but you always want to plan for in the future if that's something that you end up having. Okay, and I'm going to create that database. Okay, so now that database has been created, and I'm just going to click on this here, and I'm going to be using some of these details to connect this to, I'm going to use a tool called MySQL Workbench. This will enable me to create additional databases, and I like to use a different username and password for every database that I create. Now, when I'm talking about that, a different name and password, I'm now talking about the database on the database server, because I can create those additional databases. And I think it's really important to give a different password, a different username and password for every application. To be able to do this, I do need to change this to public mode. So you'll see here it says public mode. I'm going to enable it. I just do this temporarily to set it up, and then I revert it back to private afterwards. Okay, so that's finished configuring the public mode for the database. That's all you have to do with that. Unfortunately, you can't restrict it to IP, which would be fantastic, but that's the way it is. So that's why I just get in, I do my configuration, and then I put it back to private mode. Now I need this information here. So I'm going to use the endpoint. So I'm going to jump over now to my SQL Workbench. So this is a free tool, and I'm going to configure a new connection. Now first I'm going to call this dark pixel, and now I'm going to take this endpoint. I have to copy this big long URL endpoint, and I pop that into the host name. Okay, the port's okay, and then I need the username and the password. So I'm going to copy that username and I'll pop that in there, and the password. So I'm going to store this in the vault. And now before I click OK, I'm going to test the connection. So that connection has been successful. So now I can actually connect to my database. So here, DB Master. So that is the main database. I want to actually create my own custom ones now for my actual website. So I'm going to start with creating my Dark Pixels database. Now, in order to create a new database, there's a little tool here, create a new schema in the connected server. So I'm going to click that. And here I'm just going to type, I'm going to call it DB Dark Pixels. I like to precede it with the word DB because it helps us when we have documentation for knowing what names that we've created in our design. So that I find that very helpful. And then down here, we're going to click apply. Okay, and now it's giving a chance to review it. I'm going to click apply again. And that has been successfully created. So when I go finish, you'll now see here I've got a database, okay, and it's got tables. It's got nothing in it yet. So I'm going to close that one down. And now I want to create my users. So I'm setting this up for WordPress to be able to access this database. So I want a separate user because, as I mentioned before, if you actually have let's say a website's compromised and you've got multiple websites, you don't actually want that website to actually corrupt all your other websites. So in order to create my new users, I'm going to go to Server and Users and Privileges. So here I can actually see the default user, the master DB master user that I've used to connect to my SQL Workbench. So the only account I have so far. So I'm going to add a new account down here, and I'm going to call this, DB user dark pixels. And then I might want to type a very secure password. I usually use, for databases, I usually use 20 characters because it's not something you have to type very often. So I usually develop a really complex password and then I store that in a secure password manager. But for now, I'm actually just going to type a basic password. Okay. It's a weak one. That's okay because I'm going to delete this after I finish this video. This user doesn't have any permissions yet though. So I'm just going to have a look here. Now I don't need to give it any administrative roles. This user is only for WordPress. So I'm going to add in what it can access. So selected schema. So this user can only access the new database that I've created. And I'll click OK, and I'm going to give it most of these rights. In fact, I'm going to do all of them. You can actually narrow these down and work out what WordPress needs and just narrow it down to those ones. But for now, for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to select them all. All right, so here my user has access to my new database. So we can now use that in WordPress. So now that we've set up the database, we now need to install the client onto our server so that it can access this database. So I'm going to do this I'm logged in here to my instance, and I'm going to install, so DNF install Maria DB. So this is the version that we need for Amazon Linux. That's what comes with the package. And I'm going to hit enter. And now I also need to install sudo DNF install PHP MySQL ND. Is that okay? Yes. Okay, so those tools are going to allow our WordPress database to connect to our managed database. We're up to the point of now obtaining an SL certificate for our website. It makes it a little bit easier to get through the install process if we actually do this first. So here's the commands I'm going to use to install my SSL certificate. Okay, so I'm going to type sudo DNF and I'm going to install a library for Python. And now it's asking me for confirmation again. Yes, of course. Okay, that's successfully installed. And now I go sudo python 3 -mvnv/opt, and this is where we're going to get certbot. We're using certbot to create our certificates, and that was successful. Sudo opt certbot/bin pip install upgrade pip, and that's successfully installed. Sudo opt certbot bin pip install certbot. Now I'm installing it for Apache. Hopefully I've typed all that right. That would be I did, thankfully. Okay, and now I've got to do sudo lns, so -s, that was opt certbot bin certbot user bin certbot. Okay, and that all ran successfully. So now I've actually finished installing the certbot tool. And so now I'm going to run sudo certbot. Now I'm actually using the tool to register a domain for an SSL certificate. Enter an email address used for urgent renewal and security notices. So I'm going to enter an email address of mine. And it says, please read the documents. You must agree in order to register. Yes, I've done that previously. And would you be willing, once your first certificate is installed, to share your email address? No. It's asking me for the domain I want to register. So it's already picked up that I'm using datapixels.tech from my details. So I'm going to enter 1 to register that domain. So I'm registering a certificate. So it's going to take potentially a couple of minutes to return your certificate here. So it has successfully issued me a certificate now. Now you'll see here it says next steps. The certificate will need to be renewed before it expires. So you may have 3 months before you need to renew it. Now, so I'm actually going to set that up now, because otherwise your site ends up getting those pesky notices saying this domain is not secure. So we're actually going to auto renew that straight away. I'm actually going to copy and paste this command straight into there. Okay, so that's now added it to an auto script that's going to renew that certificate for me. So let's actually have a look now and test my site, and let's see if we've got a secure site. And look, there you go. You can see it's automatically gone to HTTPS. So when we did some configuration of our Apache files, there's actually a new file now. So if you need to make any changes, you need to be aware that it's a different file that you're editing. So I'm going to show you this new file. So we're actually going to navigate to that location. So I'm going to go to the root first. I'm going to go to CD, etc., HTTP, PD, conf D. Okay, that's the location. Now you'll see here I've got, and I'm just going to make this larger. The file that I was editing before was this one, vhost.conf, and those settings are still there. That's still serving pages if they don't have, if you didn't have a certificate. But if you want to change the directory, you must actually change this one here, which is vhost.ssl.conf. So we're just going to go in there for a demo. It's actually copied everything from my vhost file and it's copied it into there automatically. But in future, it won't be automatic. So if you make a change, you need to do it in both. So let's have a look. Sudo nano, and I'm going to go vhost. There we go. And see, there it is. And now you'll see that it's actually configured the port 443 now instead of port 80. So port 80 is for your normal HTTP and 443 is for your SSL certificates. And you'll see it's actually added this here as well, this information about the encryption keys. So that's it. That's all we need to do for configuring your SSL certificate. And look at this, we're almost there. We've actually reached the point of configuring our AWS server, and we're at the point now where we can finally install WordPress. And we're actually going to do this via the command line. We're going to download the package that way. We can configure an FTP client and do it manually that way, but it's actually a little bit faster this way. And we will set up the FTP client a little bit later, but for now, we're just going to do this via the command line. So we're back to our Linux server here. When we download WordPress, we want to make sure that we're in the right directory first. So I'm going to change directory to where we want to install this, which is inside my darkpixels.tech. And now I'm going to download the WordPress zip file. So I'm going to use sudo wget http and wordpress.org/latest .tar.gz. So this is going to get the latest version of WordPress for me, and it's going to download pretty fast. Next, we need to extract that zip file. Sudo tar xf. Now, if I have a look here, you'll now see I've got a WordPress folder. I'm going to change that name. I usually like to put it in a folder called site. So I'm going to do that by typing sudo mv WordPress, and I'm going to change it to site. There we go. Now, if we have a look, you'll see that that name is now site. Now, one problem, if I have a look at the ownership, you will actually see that that folder has got no ownership. And if I change directory inside that folder, cd/ops, and let's actually look at the details. So you'll see there's no ownership of those files. So that's going to cause us issues. So let's actually now change the folder permissions for that whole folder. So I'm just going to change directory, go up one level. So I actually want to change the permissions of the whole directory and everything inside of it. So I'm going to type sudo, and the R is recursively. I'm going to give the permissions to Apache, which is the Apache server, and data www. Okay, so let's have another look now. So Apache owns that. I'm going to change directory into the site folder. All right, there we can see Apache now owns all of those files. Now, I also want to check if there's a htaccess file already here, because if not, I may need to create one. I will actually need to create a .htaccess file to redirect my site to the site folder, because I've put it in a separate folder. I like to do it this way because it means if I have another application that I'm running from that website for some reason, I can put that into another folder and it doesn't mess up my WordPress installation. But I do need to do that little bit extra configuration for it. So let's actually just have a look at the root and see what we've got in here. I don't think I've got an htaccess file. So I have no htaccess file here, so I'm going to create one. So I'm going to go sudo nano and htaccess. So just typing the name .htaccess will create the file for me. And all I need to put in here, and I'm actually going to copy and paste this. All right, so I've got rewrite engine on, rewrite rule, and you'll see here that it's the whole site's going to redirect to the folder site. So let's save that. All right, so now if we do ls-a, we should be able to see that new htaccess file now. So once again, I need to actually change the ownership of that file so that Apache can use it. Now you'll see when I go to my website, I have my WordPress set up. So I'm going to click continue here. The database name was the name I configured in MySQL Workbench, and that was db-darkpixels. So I'm going to enter that in here now. So db-darkpixels. My username, that was db-user-darkpixels. db-user-darkpixels. Really, just make sure when you do this, design a really good consistent naming convention, okay? And I'm just going to pop in my non-secure password that I've temporarily done. Remember, I'm deleting this afterwards. So my database host, so that was the URL that we picked up here, the endpoint in LightSail. So I'm going to copy and paste that, pop that into my host, and I'm going to leave the table prefix as it is because it's always handy to have a WP prefix on the table names just in case you accidentally install another application to the same database. I always try and segregate it, but you never know what might happen. And I'm going to click submit. So that's so far so good. Let's click run the installation. So I'm going to have to put some info in here. So dark pixel. Now I'm creating a WordPress username now. So I always like to create something other than the word admin. So because admin's easier to be hacked because I've got half the equation. If you make the username something other than admin, people have to work harder. So I'm going to call it dark pixel admin, and I need to put in an email address, and I'm going to install WordPress. Now, how good is that? I can now log in and configure this WordPress site. So, and if I actually go to the site now without logging in, so I'm just going to go enter the domain name in, and look at that. I've got my sample page configured.